All right, everybody. Thank you very much for attending the LIDNUG user group's first presentation here in July. Today's presentation is from an old dog, Peter Shaw, one of our LIDNUG group managers actually, and a senior developer at Tombola Bingo. He is going to show us how to structure your Visual Studio projects, a few lessons learned. Quickly also, we do have one more event coming up in... Sorry guys, I think my timing is dying.
No, I can still hear you.
Oh, everything is freezing. Oh, I'll go by memory here. The 22nd of July. Can you see if you can change the presentation for me to the next slide for me, please, Peter?
Yep, certainly. Oh, wrong way. There we go.
Thanks for that. There we go. July 22nd, we'll be having John Robbins from Intellect on, with who's got the grubby hands on modern objects. This is a demo-filled Q&A session with John from Intellect, leading up to one of the events coming up for them in September, I believe it is. We will have two more guys on, one in August and one in September from Intellect. But this is the first one. Yeah, continue on, Peter. Thanks. Some housekeeping here as well. If you look at the LIDNUG-events.eventbrite.com, we got a new profile page. It's now even easier to find our events and what's going on in and around LIDNUG. Okay, Peter, I'm going to hand over to you because I can't control the live meeting at the moment. It's just frozen on me. Thank you very much, Peter, for coming on board and taking time out of your holiday, I believe, to present for us.
Not a problem, Bri. I'll catch you shortly. Right, so most of you have seen me floating around the group. As you know, I'm a group manager with LIDNUG. As Brian already mentioned, I work for Tombola Bingo, UK's largest online bingo site. I've got 30 years experience in the IT industry and I've picked up a few tricks along the way. Now, what are we going to discuss today? Well, after some discussions with some of my colleagues at work, we felt that a very bad practice that's often seen in the IT industry is people not paying attention to the way the projects are structured. Now, we very often band on about patterns and practices and the best way to do this type of object and that type of object and what pattern goes with another pattern, but nobody ever seems to concentrate the same amount of energy and resources into structuring your projects. Now, if you're a solo developer, that might not really matter too much, but when you're working in a large team, as I do with the current day job and as I have done with several of my other previous positions, it tends to get very, very complicated. So, as a result, I've actually come up with a few common sense ideas that I tend to adopt on all the projects that I work on and on stuff that I put together, and I've drawn in a few ideas from colleagues and other people and people like Brian and some of the questions that we see in the LIDNUG groups. So, how many times have you opened a project and you've been faced with something that looks like it's been hit by a bomb? Well, you know, it doesn't do things very good and it does make things, it makes things hard to manage. Now, what I'd like to see you take away from some of the things that we're going to discuss is a feel for some better working practices, not just the coding practices, and a willingness to actually sit down and discuss your project layouts in the same manner that you might discuss your code layouts or your coding practices before you even start to code your project. And I would also like people to think about, well, is it just our developers? Is it just our graphic artists? Is it just our UI, UX guys that are actually going to be working on this project? Well, a lot of the time, no, it's not. You have help writers, you have user guide writers, you have people who are putting together architecture documents, you have business rules that are generally going to be put into things like Word documents. So you really do have to take these users into account as well. And this is something that time and time again I've seen project teams never actually do. So, a good groundwork on which to base your own ideas. What I don't want people to do is to take what I'm going to discuss and take it away and use it verbatim. The idea here is that I give you some food for thought. Now, what kind of things can we do to stop these type of practices? Well, we can adopt a common sense approach, and we can use this same approach time and time again. However, Visual Studio can help us in a lot more ways than people tend to imagine. Just our third point here, to create custom project templates. Now, as you all know, you can customize the wizards and things like that that Visual Studio uses. And if you use this feature, you can actually enforce a specific template throughout your organization. You can enforce specific code files so that if you're using products like Red Resharper and StyleCop, you don't have to deal with things popping up and telling you to put things right. You can get straight on and do what you want to do best. Another big bugbear that I find, don't rely entirely on the wizards and tools that you get. Now, it's all very good having something that creates a project skeleton for you, but is it really going to do what you want to do? If you create a new project using a wizard, it creates the project, but does it fit your needs? How much time do you spend modifying that project or that project structure after you've used that wizard? Would it have been quicker to modify that wizard to produce your project in the first place? And then consider the needs of the others that are not tech savvy, office workers and the like. So, my top tips for a well-organized project: stop starting with specific project types. If you're going to make an MVC application, don't go straight to File New MVC application. Okay? If you're going to write a book, for example, you don't start with a book half written and add to it. You start with an empty page. So why don't we start with an empty blank solution, an empty project? Then we add that solution into SVN or our chosen repository before anything gets added to it. Right? Make one person responsible for that project layout, and that person is the only person that's authorized to make significant changes. Now, by significant changes, I'm not saying that no other person on the project team can add a file to it, but that person should be responsible for adding sub-projects. And my last tip, and this is something that I always do myself, is always start with a modeling project. So we're going to go through a quick demo, and we're going to create a modeling project. Now, I'm not going to get too much into the architecture here, and it's basically just an introduction to the tools that Visual Studio offers with regards to doing a modeling project. So just bear with me while I switch to my desktop. Now, you can see that I've already created a project here, and you can see it's all fairly well nice and laid out. And the reason I've got this layout is because I used the modeling project options, mainly the component diagram, to help me decide what my namespaces should be. Now, one big bugbear that I see time and time again when looking at project layouts such as this is namespace separation. Now, we all look at our MVC projects and we all look at the separation of concerns, but how many of us look at the separation of concerns in a similar way for things like class libraries? So, to start with, our new project we'll call pmanage. No, that wasn't supposed to happen. I opened a project there instead of started a new one. I do apologise. So we'll create a blank solution, and just bear with me. And we'll call this one select that folder, and we'll call this just C's a little bit slow. It's been running like a dog today for some reason. And we're not going to connect to a team server. So we have our blank project. Now, as I've said in my notes, the best bit of advice is to always start with a modelling project. Why a modelling project? Well as helping you to catch your users' requirements and your business requirements, it forms a central point where people who perhaps don't understand what goes on in the development of your project can associate with. Throughout the years, I've found that business users tend to like diagrams. And diagrams are a very powerful tool for communicating your ideas and your thoughts. So we'll start off with a modelling project, and we'll call this the analysis model. Now, once you have your analysis model, you can begin to define your project. You can look at your project scope. You can create items that will help you flesh it out. In my small example here, if you imagine that it's going to be a to-do list, then we might start with a use case diagram. So we'll call this a to-do list overview. Now, when you're starting at this level in your project and you're starting with this kind of diagram, what you'll probably want to do is keep it very, very simple. The simpler the better. Now, from here, I'm going to try not to get too much into the architecture with this. So if I tend to skip things and just go full steam ahead, then I don't really want to concentrate so much on what I'm designing. I'm trying to concentrate on how I structure things within the project. So we'll call this our to-do list application. And that will give us our subsystem. Now, in any preliminary layout, when you're first starting a project, you need to decide what your project's going to be based on, and it's going to be based on brainstorming. Now, your brainstorming is undoubtedly going to uncover actors. So from our analysis model, we can add actors in, and we'll say this is going to be our user, and we'll give him a place on our diagram, and we'll make him have an association to our to-do list application. Now, the idea of this initial brainstorming will be that generally you might be around a board table, you might be in a small meeting room, you quite likely might have Visual Studio running on your laptop, and you might be displaying this on a projector. Now, what you want ideally here is for your initial brainstorming sessions to last for no longer than an hour each. And you really want to invite anybody who is in any way involved in the project into these brainstorming sessions, particularly your stakeholders and your business clients. Now, as you go through iterations of brainstorming and various ideas come out, comments are going to come out, people are going to make suggestions, and you really are going to start to get a feel for what this is going to do. So in our case, our user might want to create items, delete items, edit items, mark items complete, and various other things. And you really you just want to be going round and round the table. You know, you don't want an open forum, but you do want people to voice what their thoughts and what their ideas and how they see the resulting application might want to work. Now, eventually what you'll end up with here is lots of different ideas, and some you will throw out, some you won't. For example, we might have a subsystem that will mark to-dos complete, and that might interact with our user in a different way, in that it's a dependency rather than association. A dependency that might send emails when a task is complete. Now, that's a dependency because in order for that to work, the user has to have made some entries into the to-do list application. So you also are going to find through this brainstorming session that you have an association there as well. Now, that's looking okay for us for now, so we'll save that one. Now, your next step and your next iterations in brainstorming, when you're doing your first modelling projects, will be then to start taking the items that you have in here. Yeah? So we will add into the user views to do items. Now, it's very important that during these initial brainstorming sessions and during these modelling project ideas that you use a consistent vocabulary. And you don't want to be using a technical vocabulary as well. These early stages will define things like edit, delete, mark, save, update. You need to use a terminology that most people understand. So moving on from there, now we'll just close that one and we'll start fleshing things out a little bit further. So we'll have another use case and we'll say something like user views items. So again, we're back to our blank analysis model here. Only difference is here now, you'll see that because we're starting to flesh things out, we have our user that we can reuse. And this will link back to the user that was created during your initial brainstorming sessions. Now, user viewing items, so we'll add a use case in for this, and we'll say user opens to application. Now, you'll notice at this point I'm still not doing any specifics to the application. I'm not saying that this is definitely going to be a web application. I'm not using vocabulary like user opens homepage, user opens this view, user starts this. All I'm suggesting is that the user opens the to-do application. You really must keep things as generic as possible. The more generic they are, the easier it is to handle. So, opens to-do application. We may add another use case. User retrieves list of to-do items. And to-do items are displayed. Now you can see we've took that one single step that came out as part of our initial brainstorming session, and we've turned that into 3 steps. And by repeating this process and refining and reiterating the process each time, you will eventually break down everything into manageable chunks that can then be assigned to project teams. And what's more, as you'll see when we start getting to the component diagram, it'll actually help you to define your namespaces. For now, however, we'll just connect all these associations. One little tip when you're using the model designer within Visual Studio, if you double click on an item in the toolbox, you'll find that you can actually reuse it without having to go back each time, and then just clicking in the middle and pressing your escape key will switch it back off. Right, so once we've got these basic use case diagrams, what's our next step? Well, once we've done that, we then need to start thinking about the conceptual model. Now, as you would imagine by this point, and several iterations and several brainstorming sessions, you'll have concepts in mind such as a to-do item, a list of to-do items, that kind of thing. So what we would probably then go on to do is start creating a class diagram. Now, class diagram doesn't have to mean that you're creating code-based classes. Okay? At this point, we're still looking at the analysis of the problem domain and not the solution to the problem. So, from this point, we'll say overview.classDiagram. And we're going to start fleshing things out a little bit more now, because we know that we definitely are going to need a to-do item. Now, during our brainstorming sessions and as part of our business rules, we also know that a to-do item can have several different types of to-do. So we can start thinking about adding an enumeration, for example. And a to-do item may be connected with, or in fact, our to-do item almost definitely will be connected with some kind of user information, so we know which user created which item. Now you'll notice what I'm doing here is I'm shrinking these boxes up. Again, because we're still just looking at the analysis of the problem, we're not really interested in types, properties, or anything like that. We're interested only in the relationship. So we know that our to-do item is very likely going to have a dependency on user info. After all, you're not going to be able to create a to-do item unless a user has created that item. Excuse me. And we do know that a to-do item is going to have an association to our to-do types. And it's going to be a one-to-one relation. So you begin to get a feel for how the modelling project can start to flesh things out. The next level that you would want to go to, once we've gone past this, just bear with me. So our analysis model then leads on to our conceptual model. Now, you can, if you want to, add your conceptual model diagrams into the analysis model itself. However, I would strongly advise against doing that. Instead, the way I generally do this is I create a second modeling project, and I then go on to start naming these using our domain-specific application. So we know that we're creating a to-do application, and this will now be our conceptual model. Now, from our conceptual model, we start fleshing out the actual architecture of the application. Generally, you might want to start with a layer diagram. And this is nothing, there's nothing special goes into your layer diagram. It's very much like a lot of the layer diagrams that you'll see in your patterns and practices, except for a few pertinent points. And that is, I have too many notes here. Layers only should be added if you are actually going to use them. Now, how many times do we see something that looks like this? We have layer, upon layer, upon layer, upon layer, and it seems never ending. We have presentation, we have business logic, we have data access, and we have many others. And then we have layers with inside layers. If you're not going to use a layer, or if it's never been brought up in any of your preliminary brainstorming sessions, then you really don't need to create this. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to do a simple box, and we're going to treat that as our application. Now, within our application, we already know that there is going to be some kind of interface. So we're going to put our presentation in there. But we're not going to call it presentation. We're going to call this our user experience. Now, as you can see, as I mentioned before, I'm deliberately steering away from technical terms. Now, presentation layer is not really a technical term, but to many people who are not involved directly in the development of projects, then presentation layer does become a technical term, as does data layer, as does business layer. User experience is much more friendly to those who you'll deal with in the early stages of your project setup. They understand concepts such as user experience, such as application. For your data layer, if you're going to include a business layer, then you might want to call that business rules. And again, color code things as well. Color coding, again, is very important. Try and be as visual as possible. We'll put one more layer in there, and we'll call this one the database. So again, you see how we're using diagrams to communicate all this information. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, up until this point, I'm making a big noise about non-technical people being able to understand what you're doing with your projects. And while I always maintain that that is a very, very pertinent point, what we're doing here, we're expecting them to be able to load up a copy of Visual Studio and understand these diagrams. Well, not exactly understand, but display these diagrams. So that kind of contradicts what we're trying to achieve here. Now, what you will probably want to do with a lot of these diagrams is either to screenshot them, which I can't seem to do within live meeting, and I don't appear to have the export plugin that I had installed. But what we can probably do is we can screenshot these, we can export them, we can do something else with them. And if you can, you really should try and change these diagrams into a more readable format that doesn't require other stakeholders in your project to need Visual Studio to view them. Now, all of this should, if you stick with it and you look at it in detail and you paid a lot of attention, all of this should, in theory, lead you eventually to be able to come up with your conceptual component diagram. Now, your conceptual component model should serve a very important purpose, and the most important point, or the most important purpose that it should serve, is to define your namespaces. Once you get to this stage, you should have a very, very clear vision and a very, very clear idea of what each of these layers are going to be, or each of these smaller parts. So, for example, this might be to do application.web. And to do application.web may have come out of the brainstorming sessions where you went down the user interface route and where you decided, well, hey, you know, we would like this to be an MVC application. We would like this to be a web-based application. Again, use consistent naming. I can't iterate how important it is to keep your naming and the concepts that you use as constant and as ubiquitous as possible across every bit that you do in your modeling project. So here we might have our to-do application dot business rules. We may have If you decide to use a DAL, many people do use a DAL layer, then we may have data access. And don't forget as well that you also want to put your backing store on here. So if you're using an SQL database, by the time you get to this point, you should again have a clear idea that you're going to be using an SQL database. And again, color code these things. So if, for example, we look at that one, we'll give that a green color. We'll give these two an orange color, and we'll give this one a yellow color. Now, why have I got two orange colors in there? Well, this is where you start fleshing out your actual project structure. Now, because we've already figured out that our web is going to be MVC, then follows your business rules and your data access are most likely going to be class libraries. Your SQL database may be a database project. By color coding them, excuse me, by color coding them, and again, keeping a consistent look and feel across all of your diagrams, you can instantly visually see what project types need to be created once you start going ahead and start creating the code for this project. Now, again, once we get to that point, because we now have our conceptual diagram, we know that in our Solution Explorer, we now need to add 4 sub-projects. The first one of which will be an MVC application. And don't be afraid to use very long names. It's better to be descriptive with your file names than it is to have to write masses and masses of documentation, or indeed explain lots and lots of abbreviations to people who really don't care and don't want to keep up with the many abbreviations that are present in today's IT industry. So we'll create an empty MVC application there. And we'll create some class libraries. So we'll have our business rules, and to do application that access. And one last project. An SQL Server 2008 database project. Now, if you're creating database projects, this is one exception to the rule where I would definitely advise that you always use the wizard over the naked project. The reason being is setting the connection strings up can sometimes be a tricky affair. You have generally 2 sets really just make that a lot easier. However, for the purposes of what we're doing here, I'm just going to choose the normal database project. And there we have it. So you now begin to see that you have a very, very nice, very neat laid out project structure that mirrors your component model. And if you've done everything thoroughly, it should match your layer diagram as well. And you should be able to directly relate any concepts that were fleshed out in your analysis model directly to unique singular components within your project structure. Okay, so let's just minimize that and we'll go back to the one that I created previously. Now you'll see also that this one's under SVN control as well. I was actually going to cover putting that one under SVN control that I've just created, but for reasons unknown, my SVN server decided it doesn't want to create a new repo, so we'll just have to go with what we already have. But you'll see, as I've discussed already, we have this one here is a little bit more fleshed out than the one we've already created. Something else that you'll also find is very, very useful to have in any of these diagrams, particularly in your initial brainstorming ones, are these. Now, I tend to put vision statements everywhere that I can possibly put them, especially during brainstorming sessions, purely and simply because it gives a focal point for the stakeholders and the people involved in the project to focus on. It's very, very easy to take a room full of people who are really excited about a new project that they're going to launch and get extremely carried away with it. By having a vision statement, you have a central point of focus. And if you've got a permanent meeting room, what you might actually want to do is put this out on a big piece of paper and pin it up on the wall. Again, we have the conceptual overview diagrams. Now, you'll see here, I have two users. Now, that has actually come out of this text here, which I think we've just botched up slightly. Out of our brainstorming session, you'll see that we've come with authenticated users and non-authenticated users. And that led naturally to having an authenticated user, which is a dependency on the normal user. The normal user view to do items, an authenticated user can edit, mark, delete and create. Again, what you're looking to achieve is natural progression from your model and your designs and your diagrams down to your actual architecture, down to your project structure. Now I can just switch back to my slide deck. So, is the UML... Right, no, sorry guys, I should actually have mentioned that before I started. The UML Model Explorer and a lot of the tools that I'm using here generally are only available with the Ultimate Edition of Visual Studio. Now, that may be a problem for those developers among you who are solo developers and tend to work from home or in smaller teams. Now, what you can do to fill that gap is there's many tools out there Particularly myself, before I started using before I started using Visual Studio Ultimate, I used to use an application called StarUML. Now, I can't remember the URL off the top of my head at the moment, but I'm sure if you searched for it on Google, you would be able to find it quite quickly. From what I remember, it's a free application, and it's certainly more than capable of creating the type of diagrams that we've been looking at here. The good part about StarUML and many of the others out there is that they create standards compliant UML diagrams. Now, just a little bit of a note on that, Visual Studio Ultimate, for all it has some very nice tools and some very nice things for creating, you will find that the UML that it creates is slightly not standard. And some applications like StarUML, for all they may be able to understand the basics that are in the UML files that are created, you may find that there are some specifics that don't transport across too well. Now, moving on. So, specific problems with certain project types. Well, as you've already seen, because we're using sub-projects and laying things out nice and neatly, it doesn't mean that we have to stop at the top level of our project. Class libraries, for example. Now, taking your class libraries for your business rules, your data access layer, that kind of thing, you'll want all these in different namespaces. When you're laying your namespaces out, don't be tempted just to put all your class libraries right in the root of that small sub-project. Okay? If you have classes within your library that deal with a particular type of to-do, a particular type of user, we covered that we may have users and authenticated users. Put everything into directories and into folders, and indeed if you're using ReSharper6 and you do decide to structure your folders within your class library project in such a way, ReSharper6 can enforce that for you. What would have been the difference between your business rule and your data access components? Okay, well, there wouldn't really be any difference. The difference between the two projects there, Martin, would be that you designed your class libraries to be that way. I'm just using business rules and data access components as examples of two particular areas where we may use a sub-project of a class library, and where we may use naming to give us conventions as to what that class library does within the project, and not just the fact that it is a class library. To-do application.business rules, when you're looking at the project folder, when you're viewing the folder within Windows Explorer on your Windows PC, tells you straight away that that is the part of the project that you need to be looking at when you're looking at your business rules. Likewise, your data access components, by naming it properly, it tells you that that's where you're going to find your data access portion. Another particular one that I've seen more times than I can remember, MVC applications. Now, I can't actually see people putting their hands up out there, but how many people have played with NuGet? I'm willing to bet that there's a fair few of you. Now, if you create an MVC application in the root folder of your development in IIS7 server, for example, and you then go and NuGet a few packages, you may or may not have noticed, but the root package folder where NuGet stores all its information will end up getting created in the root of your web server. Now, that might be desirable for the project that you're working on, or the particular thing that the particular way that you would like to use NuGet, but myself personally, if I define a set of packages for a project that I'm working on, I'd rather that that set of packages only be created within my MVC structure. but I don't want it in the root of my MVC application, nor do I want it in the root of my web server. So again, by structuring your project like this, by having to-do list.web or to-do list.application or whatever naming convention you choose to use, and having your actual presentation layer in that folder, and then having that subfolder sitting above the root of your web server, you'll find that your package folder is then created in your solution folder. And as a result, you don't have any potential for perhaps a security risk in your web server. That brings me nice and neatly onto web forms projects. Now, we've all seen web forms, we've all seen ASPX, and we've all seen the horror that these projects can produce. Folders and directories absolutely littered with ASPX files and ASPX.cs files. Web forms is not dead yet, guys. It's still got a bit of life left in it. And especially since that you can use MVC style routing now, you can have the best of both worlds. But whereas MVC gives you convention, i.e. you know where your views are, you know where your models are, you know where your controllers are, you still don't get that with web forms. Well, why not? Well, because the project doesn't create it for you when you create a project skeleton? Yeah, probably. But what's stopping you from organizing that properly? Create a folder for your ASPX pages. Create a folder for your DBML files, for your link to SQL. Create a folder for your class libraries. And when we're on the subject of folders for class libraries, app.code or app_code, you don't have to use app_code, even though it is a recommended way of doing so. Create yourself a multi-class structure, just as you would with the class libraries. Folders equals namespaces, and a tidy namespace equals a tidy project. Again, keep your naming consistent and everything will follow. Some project types, unfortunately, you can't tame them. A perfect example in the small demo that I've just done in Visual Studio there is an SQL database project. SQL database projects, by their very nature, are structured up into folders for tables, schemas, stored procedures, that kind of thing. That kind of project, though, tends to be a very specialist project. So where you get a situation like that, you're very often not going to have non-technical people having to interact with that in any way. So, moving on to our non-technical users. So, well, at any point in a project lifecycle, you are going to have people who need to write Word documents, Excel spreadsheets, that kind of thing. But you can't exclude them from the project as a whole. Remember, if you're keeping everything here under SVN or some other kind of versioning system, then all those documents also need to be under that versioning system. Yep. A good organization makes it very, very easy to do that. So, if we just flick back to my desktop for a moment, and we go to the folder that was originally created. So outside of Visual Studio, you'll see that by following good naming conventions and by keeping a rigorous structure, everything in Windows Explorer is easy to understand. And you'll see here that I have a list called to-do list.documentation. Now I've just chucked a couple of dummy files in there for now, but as you can imagine, this may be this may be spreadsheets to track performance by your project managers. This may be Word documents holding business rules. In fact, you may even have done your use case diagrams as traditional Word documents as well. How do we make this available to non-technical users? Well, first things first, if you have to set their PCs up for them, then go ahead and do it. Because I can guarantee you this much now, it'll lead to a lot less tears before bedtime. So let's imagine that I'm Joe Office staff and here I'm sat at my desktop and I'm going to create myself a folder for our to-do list. One thing you have to remember is just because it's under SVN source control, it doesn't mean that you have to check out the entire project. In our case here, I'm using Tortoise SVN, which anybody who uses any kind of SVN on the Windows desktop, I would highly recommend using. It's probably the best one there is out there. And rather than have the entire project, I'm just going to concentrate on the part that my user needs. Now, let's just try stripping that off. Last time I tried stripping the end off like that, it didn't work properly. And there we go. So the net result is that our Office staff have only a folder that has only the required files in that they need to see. The golden rule here is if they don't need access to any specific parts of the project other than what they need to do the work, don't give them access to it. It prevents people from being nosy, it prevents people from tinkering, it prevents people from accidentally moving or copying files. So just nip back to my slide deck. Oh yes, one other thing I was going to cover there as well. So we've created this folder for our Office staff to use, and that will be automatically put under, well, it won't be automatically put under version control, sorry. You may need to communicate concepts such as right-clicking, committing and updating, but these should be very, very simple actions that can be done using a right-click of the menu or a left-click of the mouse button on some other icon on the system. If you're savvy enough, you may set something up as an automatic job that runs with the task scheduler under Windows and automatically checks in every hour or so. However, something else you may want to consider is the use of the Windows 7 library folder feature. Now, a lot of people don't really appreciate what the library folders can be used for within Windows 7. Well, they go to libraries, they see the documents, they see the pictures, they see the music, they see the videos. However, if you dig into the Microsoft help files and read up a little bit about these, you'll actually find that a given folder can refer to many different locations. So for example, if I look at my documents folder here, this is just a standard documents folder as Windows 7 would create at install time. You'll see I actually have two folders there. And if I really, really wanted to, I could go to my desktop and I could even add that folder. Now I'm going into my documents, as well as everything else that I have access to normally, I would also find within there my documents for my to-do list. This puts everything in a central environment where a standard PC user can see and interact with this, and there is absolutely nothing alien about opening up a copy of Word and pointing it straight at your documents folder. Of course, it doesn't have to be your documents folder. You can create specialist ones in here as well. So we might have a projects library. And within that project library, we have our to-do list one, but we may also have Facebook app, and we can include that too. And the net result there is you end up with a projects library that lists your Facebook app and your to-do list. So if I then go and create a new Word document in there, that will then become part of my Facebook app folder. If I update something in here, that will update the folder in my to-do list. And these folders don't have to be on the machine that you're using either. They can be on network shares. I wouldn't recommend using network shares, especially not if you've got things under version control, but you can use them for that very purpose. And of course, the good thing about your folders being under the version control doesn't show through into library folders, and when anything is updated or committed in here, it shows up, or it should show up, in your master project as well. So we'll just switch back to the slide deck again. So library folders can be used to hide the ugly stuff. And you really are a very, very big chunk of the way here now. So you've integrated your office users, you've integrated your devs, you've integrated your project managers. Everything is in a central place, everything is under version control. What is our next step? Well, what about when the project's finished? Once your project's finished, it's going to get handed over to the maintenance staff. And if you've done things properly, and if you've structured things well, and if you've got documentation where it's easy to find, it really is going to make these guys' jobs so much easier. And believe you me, I've done third line support in the past. And I know what it's like when you get a panicky phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning and you're scrabbling around on tons and tons of servers in a data center, raking through folder after folder after folder, just trying to find that small little elusive diagram that shows which page is connected to which back-end class, or which database table holds which small item of data. Documentation can be found easily, architecture diagrams can be pulled up quickly, code patches are intuitive. And if you've done it properly and tied it in with a continuous integration system, then your break fixes are almost instantaneous. Source code can be pulled up, patches can be applied directly in Visual Studio, you can hit commit, and if everything goes according to plan, within 5 or 10 minutes, then you'll be looking at a fix in place and ready to rock and roll. So, using the tools that Visual Studio has in place, you can use the Architecture Explorer to look at how your project's been laid out. Now, I was going to do a demo of the Architecture Explorer here, but unfortunately I didn't get around to creating a project that had a full enough setup to make much of a use of it. So I'm just basically going to skim the surface here. Now again, I'm using Visual Studio Ultimate Edition here, so you probably will find that a lot of the things that we have here are not available in the lesser versions. Just bear with me, it's here somewhere. Oh, there it is, right in front of my eyes. I'm going blind in my old age. So you'll see when we start with the Architecture Explorer that we get our solution view, we have our class view, and we have any saved DGQL queries that we may have as well. We can save queries directly in the solution. So if you've had to look for something previously in a particular part of your project, you can save that within the solution, and that will be checked into SVN along with all your other files and along with all your other assets as well. So if you have these saved DGQL queries, they will remain in place for your support staff to just pull them up and drill right down through your application. Now we'll just go down and into our class view here. So we'll go through the MVC application here, because using this with the MVC application and a lot of the defaults that are in there, that should help us. That'll give us a decent groundwork to have a look and see what we can do here. If we go into the application itself, and I know we may not have anything. Let's just try a build. Hopefully nothing will fall over on me. No, thank you. And you'll see that we can drill right down into our application. What calls what? What is linked to what? And if we were using our data access and we had some proper class hierarchy in there, we'd be able to see which elements call which parts of our data access layer. Now you'll see here you get all usernames, users list. List is one of the built-in types. Now the good part about this all is, once you've found something that you want to deal with, we can then generate a dependency graph from that. Now I'm not entirely sure how well this will show up, because again, like I said, there's not an awful lot of things in here, but there we go, we've got a small graph to play with there. And you can see there's our dummy data class over here, which is not actually linked to anything at the moment. And you can see our MVC application, the generics, and we can drill right down through everything. Now, as we expand on everything, you can see that in turn, we can start building up a really, really good picture of what our application should look like. And as you can imagine, if you were sitting at a maintenance desk and you got that panicky call, having this type of information in front of you really is going to be a lifesaver. Again, we can save these DGML queries. So if we save that within our project, for example, they'll be usable again at a later point. Now, if we just flip back to the slide deck. So, pretty much to recap, if we just go back through some of my notes here, sorry. Don't use technical vocabulary when dealing with non-technical business users. Keep your vocabulary throughout your project consistent. Keep your naming standards consistent. Keep your folder structure nice and consistent. If you have features within the operating system that you can use to make life easier, use them. If you have to do groundwork to prepare a lot of this, then do so. Different layers within an application, just because a layer diagram states that these are the recommended layers, it doesn't mean that you have to create those layers. Above all, SVN and version control is very, very important. I need to share my desktop. Why do I need to share my desktop asset? What's up? Can you not see my slide? Okay, well, as I was going to say anyway, moving on, that's pretty much all that I've got to cover now. If you want to follow up on some more information on the tools that you've seen me use in Visual Studio and some of the concepts that I've touched on, the Visual Studio VS Architecture blog is a very, very good place to start. And the MSDN Microsoft Library pages also describe a lot of the tools in great detail and how they can be used not only for your modelling, but to give you an overall picture of your project management as well. Continuous integration, I apologise, I didn't have time to cover that in as much depth as I wanted to, but those two links there, troyhunt.com, jetbrains.com, Team City, offer a wealth of information. That's okay, that's it. They offer a wealth of information, particularly Troy Hunt's website. Troy Hunt himself not only covers continuous integration, but he has quite a lot of articles covering a lot of the subjects that I've discussed here with you today as well. SVN, Tortoise SVN, as I say, if you're using any kind of SVN-based version control, you really must use Tortoise. It doesn't matter whether you use Visual SVN or ANC or anything above that, Tortoise is the absolute godsend. And the reason for that is because when you're integrating with your non-technical users, committing and updating really is as simple as a right click. Project management with Visual Studio using Team Foundation Server. Now, one thing that I didn't cover here, I've really just skimmed the surface with using the modeling projects and using sub-projects and how to divide your projects up and how to make your project structure work for you. But if you're using Team Foundation Server, then there is just so much more you can do. If anybody wants to grab me within the LinkedIn group, I'll quite happily point you at some of the videos and some of the links and resources that I've looked at on using TFS to aid with your project management. Some of it really is absolutely exceptional. TFS is not just another version control system. It integrates your project management, it integrates your workflow, and a whole host of other things. As well as that, once I finish this presentation within the next couple of days, I'll be writing a blog post up on project management practices within Visual Studio and just basically reiterating some of the points that I've discussed here this evening. My blog is at shortyds.wordpress.com, or you can catch me on shorty_ds on LinkedIn, and as well as here in the LIDNUG group. So, on that point, does anybody have any questions? Brian, if you're still there, feel free to step back in.
So I'm still here. Yeah, just waiting to see the indication that comes in. It's been a few requests for
me to shut up.
For the model solution, but yeah, one of the things that just occurred to me, it's not really going to work having the model solution, UML one, if you don't have the Ultimate Edition.
Yeah, I'm quite happy to provide a copy of the solution that I built up and the slides to anybody that wants them. As I said, I'm going to put this up on my blog, maybe not tonight, but certainly in the next couple of days, so I'll quite happily provide links for people who want to download them. That's not a problem.
Excellent.
Well,
I definitely learned something new. I definitely learned something new today, without a doubt. Some things I would use, some things I wouldn't. But it was very informative, Peter. I really enjoyed it. and I think the members enjoyed it as well. Oh, and one thing I definitely learned was the Windows 7 library, so you can use that a little bit to include multiple folders. I just left those alone.
Yes, it's one of those little tips that hides there under the covers and suddenly jumps up and bites you when you least expect it. I remember when I first saw the libraries used, it wasn't actually in a project scope. I think it was one of these lock and on power presentation, power user tip things. And I remember looking at it and thinking, these things have just been wasted so much by being used for things like normal documents and pictures, you know? And it was at that point that I realised just the potential that you got here. Now, one thing I would like to say about Windows library folders, they're both a curse and they're a godsend. Because if you don't watch what you're doing, it is very, very easy to get things out of sync. As I mentioned during the presentation, if you use an SVN, you don't want to be spreading these things across shares on servers and things. Now, if you can imagine having a share that points to another copy that's checked out on another machine of the same repository, you can quite quickly begin to see how you might have two areas in your library folder with the same name on that might circularly refer to itself. And you could end up causing yourself some rather nasty headaches with file collisions and such like. Yes, Mike, as is always with our LIDNUG presentations, it'll be available on lidnug.org to download in our archive section. And as I've just previously mentioned, to those folks who want it, I will make a copy of my slides available, and I will make a copy of the solution that I put together available, just to give you a groundwork to build on. Any more?
Yeah, I should just say, Mike, hopefully the recording will be available definitely within 24 hours now, as it is in here today, and he's done the recording. He has a phenomenal upload speed and doesn't have the same issues I have with putting them up on the server, uncorrupted. All right, if there's nothing else, Peter, thank you very much.
I'm all out of words, mate. I didn't prepare anything else. You know,
No, that's fine.
You're welcome, Mike. If anybody has any questions that they want to pop up with, by all means. We've still got a good 10 minutes of time to play with if anybody wants to make use of it. I guess I could have a look through some of my notes that I've got written down here. So, I don't know, how about, shall we go over a few little tips and tricks, eh, Brian? What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. One thing I want to recommend, big time, I want to recommend using templates.
Yes, definitely. Did I not cover that? I thought I mentioned that.
I think you did in passing, but we didn't go into it. But yeah, no,
yes.
If you mention it, I'll definitely support it 100%.
Well, certainly, when you're building your projects, what I would strongly advise people to do is to sit down and build yourself a particular template that relates to your company and its practices, and run this by everybody. Run it by your developers, your project managers, your technical leads, your infrastructure guys, your database administrators, you know. Let everybody have a say on this and build a good template that is reusable. And once you've got that template and once you've got it installed, put it somewhere where anybody in the industry can drag it down into their copy of Visual Studio and add it as a wizard. If that means you've got to teach some of your developers on how to use the Visual Studio Extensions API in order to make it into a Visix package, or if you want to try even putting it into a NuGet package, then the world's your oyster. But I can't recommend that strongly enough. If you think about following the dry principle as you would if you were coding. If you don't repeat yourself when you're coding, why should you repeat yourself when you're doing the groundwork to make this kind of work easier for you? What advice do you have regarding learning project structures for somebody making a transition to .NET beyond your presentation today? Well, that's quite a broad question, Mike. I would say look at what's been done already. There's strong reasons why people make the decisions that they make when they're structuring projects and solutions. And generally, just looking at a project doesn't really reveal the underlying thought processes. So if you have access to somebody who's already undertook this kind of work, who's already sat down and said, do you know what, I'm going to make my job so much easier, then quiz them at whatever length you can get the information out of them. Talk to people in your organisation. You know, go and speak to Judy in accounts. Hey, Judy, when you're doing the spreadsheets for the end of year figures, you know, where do you store your spreadsheets? How do you store your documents? What makes sense to you? You know? Look, it's like looking at a cloud of variables and making sense of the variables. Yeah? And just people's opinions. You know, another good source of information, look at your family. Watch how your family use their PCs. Where does your wife store her photographs? Does she always put them in My Pictures? No. If she doesn't put them in My Pictures, where does she put them? Why does she put them in that folder? You know? People who put the My Documents folders onto a different drive. People who keep their Windows folders and their program files folders on separate drives. Things like that, just little things that you wouldn't usually pay any attention to. And usually have some really good, really hidden indicators. Above all, look for human nature. Look at, not just in your digital life, how do you organise your desk? Think about, why do you always have your phone to your right? Why do you have your mouse on your left? Why do you have your pen caddy there? Why do you have this monitor at that position? That kind of thing. Little bits lead to a very, very big picture, just like little pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. That's probably the best thing that I can say to you with regards to this kind of learning curve, if you like. Most of what I picked up, I just picked up over the years working in the industry. I looked and I saw what one person did, and I looked and I saw what another person did, and I drew on the best of both worlds. Right, from .NET to mainframe, wow. Brian, help me out here. Are you still there, mate?
Yeah, I'm still here. I'm thinking, oh.
.NET to mainframe. Damn. I've gone the other way, but I've never gone down that route before. What are your thoughts on that?
Through .NET from the mainframe. So let's see. I think honestly, Mike, that there's a lot of do's and don't for how to structure your projects. There's a lot of do's and don't of how to write code, and we know there's a million. Yes, from mainframe to .NET.
Ah, that's right. Sorry, he is going the other way.
Yeah.
Well, that's a completely different kettle of fish. Mainframe. Sorry, go on.
Yeah. Honestly, I think it's a bit of trial and error.
Oh, for sure.
It is. You really have to find a way to work that is productive for you and your team. There's lots of tools to help you out. I mean, tools like what Peter has shown today, Ultimate Edition of Visual Studio, is fantastic. I can highly recommend it, but not everybody can afford it. So it comes down to finding a way that you enjoy working and that's productive for you. It is, as Peter says, how do you, how do you structure your normal files on your PC? How does you take examples from your colleague, your wives, or whatever. There's, from mainframe to the net, there's no similarity. There really isn't.
It is a very, I can't even think of a way to describe it, to be honest with you. I think the quickest analogy I can make there really is the difference between command line Unix, command line Linux, and graphical user interface Windows. The one thing I think you'll have the biggest problem with, Mike, coming from a mainframe world down to .NET, is going to be your file name conventions. Particularly when you look at things like VAX and DMS and the AS400. You have really strange characters in file names there. VAX DMS, for example, I know things are segregated up in very much the same way as in SQL Server. If you've looked at a fully qualified path name in SQL Server, you will see that you have an open square bracket, database name, closed square bracket, full stop, open square bracket, DBO, closed square bracket, dot blah, and so the process goes on. VAX DMS names are very, very similar to that. Now, as nice and readable as that is, okay, no worries, Brian, we'll just finish it. As nice and readable as that is, it's not going to be possible to achieve that under Windows because Windows won't accept those characters. So I guess you really just have to suck it and see a lot of the time. Try a few different ideas, see what works, see what doesn't, and draw on everything around you. Now, we're going to have to wrap up here because our recording artist is about to take off. So on that note, I don't know if you want to, anything else you need to do, Brian? Hello? No?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was on mute. Yes, I just want to thank our sponsors for continually supporting the community, for our members here to for attending, and to you for taking the time off again on your holiday.
That's
Thanks,
not a
everybody.
problem, mate. Thanks a lot. Right. And is that a stop?
It is.